everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Forbes contributor, Toni Fitzgerald. Toni, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. The Writers Guild of America went on strike Monday for the first time in 15 years. Can you break it down for us and first explain how we got to this point?
Absolutely. So the Writers Guild of America is basically all the people who write for TV and screen. And they renegotiate their contract. I believe it's every 3 years. And they do that with the studios. Their group is called the AMTP, I believe, something like that. And so essentially they make a deal for the next 3 years that entitles the writers to certain residuals, which is money that they get for their writing once it's done. So, you know, a TV show that goes, it used to be went into syndication, now it goes into streaming, can make millions of dollars in that time, and writers see part of that. So they're essentially negotiating over how much of that they get. Now, the last time these negotiations took place, if you think about it, was right at the beginning of COVID. Nobody wanted to strike at the beginning of COVID. The deal that they got then, even though there were a lot of concerns about streaming, was not as strong as it could have been. So everyone has kind of seen this possibility coming for a while. And, you know, right now, writers are saying that the deals that they're being offered just isn't fair.
And right now, we're currently at a stalemate. Obviously, a strike is worst case scenario. But when you think of the last strike, that was 15 years ago. And in a piece for Forbes, you quoted screenwriter Eric Tipton, and he said this: "Remembering what happened in 2007 is an important context for today. It seems to me that there's a sanitized mythology about the last strike spreading on social media." Can you break that down for us? What does he mean by that?
Sure, absolutely. So, you know, first of all, 15 years doesn't seem like it, but it was a while ago. And certainly in terms of the way technology moves, it was a lifetime ago. The last strike, the writers came out of it with some success. They got some of the things that they were looking for. But I think what he means by a sanitized version of it is thinking that it was a huge success, or, you know, looking back and seeing only the gains and not what was left on the table. The unfortunate reality of what came from that strike is that we didn't have a great understanding at the time of how influential streaming was going to be. I mean, at that point, I think the writers, their biggest demand was that they wanted residuals from downloads. Well, tell me the last time you actually downloaded a show. It just didn't turn out to be the way technology went. It went instead in a subscription direction. So when he's talking about, you know, not looking back at that strike with sort of wide eyes and thinking that it was fantastic, I think it just means that you have to be aware that going on strike is a pretty serious thing to do. And it impacts not just the writers, but everybody who's on the staff of shows that, you know, are not being produced right now. Like the late night shows are already off the air, and that impacts the makeup people, the costume people, everybody.
I think when you look at the landscape of today versus the landscape of 15 years ago, I mean, so much has changed. We have cord cutters right now. We're not really tuning into that appointment TV like we were 15 years ago. Plus, with the rise of social media, I mean, in real time, you can go on Twitter and see updates of the strike as it happens. I'm right now on the East Coast, and I can see the strike almost basically live from the picket lines on the West Coast just by opening Twitter. So is the strike also so much different this time because of all of those changes, mixed with people now can turn to streamers for so much more different content?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think that the differences you're going to see with this strike are going to play out in social media in terms of public opinion. I'm sure that others have also been on Twitter and seen some of these things. You know, I was looking at the feeds of some of my favorite writers from Ted Lasso, for instance, and they had pictures of the signs that were there, you know, including some pretty funny ones, because writers are writers. I mean, if you want to talk about some good writing, look at the picket signs. But the writers this time have a really unique opportunity to tell their story on social media and get that buy-in from, the public that could help pressure the studios to accept a deal, perhaps before they are ready, but just because you're going to be seeing this play out in real time in such a live way that you didn't 15 years ago. I mean, Twitter was around, but it was not what it is today.
And public pressure is one of the 5 lessons you think we should learn from the last strike. But you wrote for Forbes other lessons as well. So let's start with the first lesson you wrote. 1, reality TV can be a stopgap, but labor issues loom. How does reality TV play a role here?
So obviously with reality TV, you would think that there are no writers for that. That's actually not completely accurate. There are people who shape the storylines. It's not just that the Housewives shows that everything happens naturally. There are storylines that play out. These people are not always paid as writers, and there tend to be less diverse writers' rooms for those programs. But one thing that this is going to bring to the fore is simply that fact that the people who are involved in shaping the storylines in reality TV shows are not paid like writers. They do not get the credit that writers do. And, the last strike, the networks relied heavily on unscripted television. Anybody who remembers TV from that time remembers there was like endless episodes of Big Brother, Celebrity Apprentice, Survivor. It just seemed like everything was reality for those 4 or 5 months. The networks do not have the stranglehold on public attention that they used to. And so, it's not going to be as evident probably because not everybody's tuning into Fox or ABC every night anymore to get their entertainment fix. But I do think that we will see a lot of reality programs, and that's going to give those writers and story shapers, a better platform to demand what they are worth as well.
You said an interesting point. Not everyone is tuning into Fox or ABC or those networks every night. Is that to the detriment to writers now? Will that hurt them in these negotiations?
I don't know that it'll hurt them. I do think it's just such a different landscape. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, certainly the dynamic of streaming is different from the dynamic of network television. And a lot of these streaming shows, first of all, they have way fewer episodes. A season of, for example, the morning show on Apple TV is 10 episodes. And if you look at like the Chicago shows on NBC, those are 20 episodes. So that's very different, but it also means that it won't be as obvious as quickly for the streamers that they have run out of material, whereas it would be for, the broadcasting cable networks.
Another lesson you have is about big tech, and it's big tech could scramble the outlook at the table. How so?
Yeah, so the last time that this happened, Netflix was not a major player in original television. I don't think that House of Cards even premiered for maybe 3 or 4 years after that, and that was when the real boom began in streaming. These tech companies, they have a much more diverse portfolio than the other ones in some cases. So like an Amazon, obviously the TV aspect is not the only place where they're making their money. They might feel a little less pressure to go to the table because they have other things to rely on. Same with Apple. Now, that's not to say that it's not important to them to get these deals made, because those are really important parts of their industry. But it just gives it a really new dimension that I think is going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
That's interesting you say that. That goes right into my next point. And the last strike lasted from November 2007 to February 2008. Now, looking back, 15 years later, you're writing No One Really Knows What the Future Holds. How have the wants of writers changed within the past 15 years? I know you mentioned downloads, but what else is there?
Well, so one thing that I think is interesting that the union has really pushed on is saying that TV at this point has turned into a gig economy for writers. And that's very different than when you had, four main broadcast networks and a handful of cable ones. There are more jobs out there for writers and in different ways than there used to be, which you would think would be an advantage, but it's also been somewhat of a disadvantage because there's a lot more competition. There are also just those things coming down the pike that you can't even imagine. So, for example, just within the 3 years that this latest contract was negotiated in, just in that time, you had the spectacular launch and failure of Quibi, which was that short-lived network that served up, really short, like 10-minute episodes. And that could have been a great place for writers to be. It could have offered more content, but it came and went so quickly. Right now, we're still sort of in that stage where we're not sure which one of these new media things is going to last. It looks like streaming is going to be here for a while, but what does that mean for the future? And certainly one of writers' huge concerns in all of this is the new technology of artificial intelligence, AI. And there's a lot of people who like the idea of using AI to write things. It's cheaper, certainly. I think we could argue for a while about what the quality of that would be, but one of the writers' big focuses in this is to say, no, you can't use AI to replace us. And they have a point.
I do want to pivot now to the late night hosts, and you write for Forbes that they will suddenly carry more heft. Now, a clip that has been going viral on social media the past few days was that infamous moment of Conan O'Brien flinging his wedding ring, seeing how long it would spin during the last writers' strike 15 years ago. So is there any indication of how hard these shows will be hit?
Well, I think this is a really interesting area because, first of all, late night really is not what it was 15 years ago. We see that right now. Just last week, James Corden left his Late Late Show hosting gig, which airs behind Late Show, and he's not even being replaced. They're putting on retreads of an old Comedy Central show there, which is some nice, obvious corporate synergy. But it tells you a lot about what the networks are thinking about late night television and the commercial value, like literal commercial value that it has to them, which just does not reflect what it was 15 years ago. So that's one thing. And my colleague David Bloom wrote a really interesting piece going more in depth on that on Forbes the other day. But I also think the late night shows are interesting because they also can't afford to go off the air forever. And that's what led to that Conan moment. When you come back on the air early and you don't really have a contract with Raiders, then you're going to be sitting there spinning your ring. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on those shows to get back on the air more quickly than anything else. I remember during the last strike, it was a really big deal that David Letterman's company made a separate deal with his writers that allowed them to come back early because people were so hungry for content at that point, and we didn't have the endless online options that we do now. That when he came back, his ratings were huge because everybody just was excited to be part of that moment.
What were the reactions from other hosts back in 2007, 2008? And is there any indication that the hosts now are supporting their writers?
So back then, I do remember that some hosts got in a little bit of hot water because they were not seen as supporting their writers. Some of them went out on the picket lines. Others did not choose to do that. Now, obviously, they can also be seen to be in a tenuous position because even though they are all writers themselves and contribute to what goes on the air, they're also big time employees of those networks and often act as the face of those networks. And so they have a sort of a tightrope to walk on that. I do remember it came out after the strike was over that Jimmy Kimmel had been supporting not just his writers, but other staff on the show, through his own pocket. And he didn't publicize that. He wasn't telling people about that. Some people just told afterwards. And that generated, I think, a lot of goodwill for him. I will say that, over the past few days, if you've been watching Twitter, you can see some late night hosts have posted things and gotten immediate reactions. I know there was a little kerfluffle with Jimmy Fallon and whether he was supporting his writers, and someone had posted something sort of questioning something that he said. But you also better believe he reacted to that right away and made it right. So again, just what we were discussing earlier, that social media just makes everything very transparent. So if you're looking for the big stories, go to somebody's Twitter feed and see how the writers are reacting to them.
I do want to break down that Jimmy Fallon kerfuffle, as you described it, a little more, because I think that's really important. And I think that leads us into your final lesson about public pressure. So on the Met Gala carpet on Monday night, Jimmy Fallon did say that he was supporting his writers. Someone on his team, a photo research coordinator, tweeted, quote, "He wasn't even at the meeting this morning to tell us we won't get paid after this week." That went massively viral and obviously not a good look for Jimmy Fallon. But then they updated this morning saying he was in Wednesday's meeting, and she wrote this: "He got NBC to give us a second week of pay, and he will be paying us himself for a third week." So how critical is public pressure at this point?
I think it's going to be huge for this strike. I don't think you can underestimate the power of viral moments like that. And they're going to ping around. And I think it's really good and important that the person who commented originally did come back and mention that, because you can also bury someone very easily these days in social media with, that right away reaction. I think the studios will be watching social media, certainly, to gauge reaction. It's not going to force any deals to be made, but it could get them to the table a little bit more quickly. And I think, again, writers are communicators. They're so good at making their points. I mean, just right before we came on here, I was looking at a few writers' feeds, and they had very cohesive breakdowns of what they're looking for and why. And, the WGA also very publicly released a breakdown of exactly what they had asked for. And I think that transparency goes a long way to get the public on your side.
Definitely. And they're doing a great job. I mean, they're storytellers at heart. So doing a great job of portraying exactly what they want and really blasting that message all on social media. So when do you think these two sides will come to the table? When do you think we can expect an outcome?
I'm not going to be looking for anything anytime soon, I have to say. I think that the studios are in a bit of luck right now because we're coming to the tail end of the traditional TV season. Now, TV season has expanded over the years, and it doesn't mean the same thing that it did 15 years ago. But this is the time when a lot of season finales air. Everything's been shot in advance, so there's no work stoppage that's interrupting the scripted series schedules right now, even though you're not seeing the late night shows. So I think they do have a bit of a grace period. But you better believe that the NBCs, the ABCs are going to be pushing to get this resolved pretty quickly into the summer so that they can roll out their big splashy schedules for fall. What we saw in the last writer's strike that I think they really learned from was that several new shows that had a lot of momentum going into the fall got interrupted and didn't have new episodes for 4 months. And that really kind of killed a lot of those. It was disappointing and sad to see that, but definitely a lesson that they'll learn from this time and try to avoid in the next round.
As more updates come in this situation, I hope you come back and join us. Toni Fitzgerald, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. This was great.